He was taken around on the US on a tour, and punters were charged a quarter to get a close-up view of the cock. Hello everybody, welcome back to another episode of Brain Blaze. I, as always, am your host, Simon. I'm here, one of my writers. In this case, Danny has written me a script, History's Most Improbable Survivals from Horrific Accidents. Cheery stuff. Well, I mean, they survived, didn't they? So let's crack on, shall we? I want to start off with an important slice of medical advice from the Brain Blaze Clinic. Not actual medical advice. It's like, do you have to say that for medical advice? You know, or is that not financial advice, not legal advice? Do you have to say not medical advice? Or is that just like taken as blatantly obvious because you're watching a YouTube video that this is not medical advice? Or maybe it is. If you've ever experienced an excruciating severe pain in your lower right abdomen, I already know, it's an appendix thing. You got to go to the hospital like ASAP or it's going to pop and you're going to die.
Oh, poop.
A pain quite unlike anything you've ever experienced before, then seek medical attention immediately instead of making the same mistake I did, just hoping it might clear itself up in a couple of days. Like, God! It'll probably be fine. I've never had, my appendix is fine so far. I know a few people have had it removed. I mean, it's like, when I was at school, there was a kid, I swear he was off school for like 3 months because he had his appendix taken out. But then, like, otherwise I've known like mates of mine, and it's just like, yeah, you know, done. No worries. Easy. Weirdly, this is the second time that my lack of appendix has popped up in a recent Brain Blaze script. When I first started suffering from appendicitis, I initially just put it down to a dodgy Scotch egg. Oh, I could go for a Scotch egg right now. You know, that's something that some British food you get abroad. You're kind of like, you know, you can go to, this is a British store near where I live. Not that near. And it's like, it sells, you know, like Diet Coke and stuff like that. And like those chocolate covered pretzels and all that kind of shit that I love. And it's also, they've got American in there as well, like Sweet Baby Ray's barbecue sauce, which is phenomenal. But they don't have Scotch eggs. And I'm like, Scotch egg, maybe I'm going to make some Scotch eggs. This weekend, I'm making Scotch eggs.
Oh, shit, hey, fuck.
Well, it's going to be like, this is disgusting. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's good, isn't it? Lately, I've got a thing for pickles. I've been eating loads of pickles. My wife's like, are you pregnant? And I'm like, no, I just don't know. I was in the store, I saw like a big jar of pickles. And I was like, that looks fucking great. So I bought it, and I've just completely eaten this giant jar of pickles in like 3 days. My mouth is watering for pickles. Maybe I am pregnant. It was only when a doctor arrived on the scene and screamed, oh shit, in my face that I began to realize it might be a bit more serious and that I was waving goodbye to my appendix. When a doctor comes into the room and says, oh shit, it's like, oh no. It's like, if you go to the doctor's room, it's like, you might want to sit down. You're like, oh no. Oh no. Don't like that. I don't like that. God, that's scary, isn't it? It's never happened to me, but I assume someday it will. Just be honest, you might want to sit down for this one. You're like, oh, for fuck's sake. It's like that scene in Breaking Bad where it's just like, you're like, oh no. Apparently, I've been sitting on the problem for too long and I was at risk of enduring a fatal burst appendix if I left it another day. So you need to act fast when the pain strikes. But a burst appendix isn't necessarily fatal, right? It's like one of those things where you're like, apparently, it's like, oh, it's so painful. I feel so much better. I guess it's past. And that's just your appendix bursting and spreading all of that like shitty food in your insides where you get a massive infection and die. But it can get a bit tricky if you're in the middle of nowhere. This was a problem faced by Dr. Leonid Rogozov in 1961 when the Russian first realized that he was suffering from appendicitis. The bad news is that he was stuck at a Soviet research station in Antarctica. Is this the dude? He was their one doctor, and he has appendicitis himself. Did he remove his own appendix? Wasn't there some woman who cut out her own breast cancer? There's some crazy shit that's gone on down at these poles. I feel like you should have to have your appendix removed before you go, just in case. And so it wasn't like you could just hop on the tram to the nearest hospital. The good news is that the small team of 13 researchers working in the remote facility included a qualified surgeon who could remove the troubling appendix. It was him, though, wasn't it? The other bit of bad news is this qualified surgeon was Dr. Leonid Rogozov himself. Yeah, the doctor before his name gave it away, Danny. 27-year-old Leonid was the sole medical professional amongst his team who had been tasked with setting up the new Soviet base at Novolazarskaya station in the Shermacher Oasis. But as he began to suffer those severe pains, which he quickly diagnosed as appendicitis, he realized there was a bit of a quandary. The nearest Soviet base was over 1,000 miles away, and the ship back home wasn't due to arrive for another year. And the blizzard conditions in the icy wasteland rendered any aircraft rescue impossible. Leonid knew that his appendix could burst and kill him if left for much longer, so he took the only course of action on the table. He decided to try and remove his own appendix. It's like that TV show. It's so sad. It's like this comedy, The Last Man on Earth. And then there's this dude, and he gets a spoiler alert, by the way, and he gets appendicitis. And they're like, it's going to be fine. We'll just practice on, like, did they find like a medical dummy or whatever? And then it's like, and they're like, okay, we're ready for this. Let's get him under. And then he dies. So of course he did, because it's a complex surgery. Oh, fucking savage. That show was so savage at times. You're just like, oh, this is hilarious. And then it's like, oh yeah, but they've got real problems that can happen. That's got to be even worse than trying to cut your own hair. He initially worried that the procedure might be impossible. It was certainly going to get a bit painful because the patient side of him obviously couldn't be given general anesthetic, as the surgeon side of him needed to stay rather alert. He did allow himself a quick shot of Novocaine for the first incision into the abdomen wall, but then he had to keep a clear head for the rest of the 2-hour procedure, occasionally taking a 5-minute break when his head started spinning too much. Is it painful though? I mean, it's kind of gross operating on yourself, but you don't have pain receptors inside your body. So can't they just be like just constantly Novocaining the pain receptors on the outside while he's digging around in his body? I mean, it's still holy shit, but still. Adopting a casual semi-reclining position, Leonid hoped to use a small mirror to guide him, but he found that the inverted view was making things even more complicated. So he was largely forced to rely on his sense of touch. Why can't he just use 2 mirrors? So it's like, just like if you like one here and then another one here, and then you're just looking up at that mirror down there, and then it's the right way round. No, that's how mirrors work. Come on, Leonid, use your big brain. He also had a bit of help from his research colleagues who passed him the instruments and who were under strict instructions on what to do next if he lost consciousness. He almost passed out right toward the end of the fun afternoon, but quite remarkably, he managed to cling on and the offending appendix was exposed and removed. Within just a couple of weeks, he was back on regular duties at the research station. What a guy. It's a good job he acted promptly too, as the appendix had a dark stain at its base indicating that it would likely popped the next day.
Oh. No!
This incredible act of bravery turned Leonid Rogozov into something of a Soviet hero at the time, as he'd never catch a cowardly capitalist yanking out his own appendix. Definitely not. Capitalism's for weak people. Leonid and I now have something in common, as we'd both be welcome to go and live in a small settlement of Villas Las Estrellas in the Chilean Antarctic territory. The modest civilian settlement is populated by around 150 people and boasts its own school, post office and bank. But while some towns and villages are known to impose fairly strict requirements on potential new residents, the rules for Villas Las Estrellas are harsher than most. As the nearest hospital is more than 1,000 kilometers away, all long-term residents, including the children, are required to have their appendix removed before settling in. Not that you'd catch me moving there, as dogs are banned on the ground that they risk spreading diseases. The penguins get a free pass though. Amazon courier. It's mind-boggling a laugh that Julian Kopka somehow managed to survive the worst lightning strike aviation disaster in history when Lancer Flight 508 broke up 10,000 feet above the ground and plunged into the Amazon rainforest. Yet it's equally staggering that the badly injured 17-year-old somehow managed to survive alone in the rainforest for 9 days with barely any food, terrible vision, and a realization that she'd become infested with maggots. You'd be like, oh my god, I can't believe I survived a plane crash. It's like, bad news. Everyone else is dead and you're in the Amazon. For some reason, I was on Google Maps the other day and I was just looking at South America and like Brazil, where the Amazon rainforest is. And I was like, Brazil's big and the Amazon rainforest is enormous. Like, absolutely enormous.
That's quite big. Impressive.
Born in Peru, Julianne had led a pretty unusual childhood. At the age of 14, she moved to Panguana in the Amazon rainforest in 1968 as a German zoologist's parents had just set up a new biological research station there to study plants and animals. It sounds like she's like in a Disney movie. Julianne lived there until there's a horrible plane crash and she gets infested with maggots. Julianne lived there for 2 years, receiving home tuition and learning crucial survival skills until the authorities intervened and insisted that young Julianne had to stop pissing about with a Swiss Army knife and move back to the city to finish proper school. It was shortly after graduating from high school in 1971 that Julianne and her mother took a flight from the Peru capital Lima to the port city of Pucallpa as they were heading back to the ultimate destination of the research station in Panguana to celebrate an Amazonian Christmas with Julianne's father. He had wanted his wife and daughter not to travel with the Peruvian Lancer airline as they had a shitty reputation, but Lancer was offering the only flight available from Lima to Pucallpa on Christmas Eve. Yeah, there's definitely airlines that I won't fly with. Like, if there's an airline I haven't heard of, like, it's like, oh, that's a cheap flight. I'll look it up, And I'll just, look at their safety rating and be like, yes, no, thank you. That's a hard pass. And I know it's still extremely unlikely, but it's like, oh, no. Wasn't that recent scandal was it India? Or was it Pakistan? It was somewhere in South Asia where there was like pilots didn't have pilot's licenses. They just like bought them off the internet or some shit. They were flying like commercial planes. And I'm like, no.
Hello, this is your captain speaking from the, cockpit.
The airline's reputation was about to take a further nosedive, although the crew were aware of... Oh, Danny, nosedive, Jesus. Although the crew were aware of hazardous weather conditions ahead, they allegedly pushed on anyway to meet the Christmas schedule. Within just 25 minutes of the planned 60-minute journey, Lancer Flight 508 flew directly into a huge thunderstorm and was struck by a lightning bolt. Julianne recalls the panicked screaming from her fellow passengers, whilst her mother calmly informed her that their lives were over. Holy shit, Mum. Jesus. Also, planes get struck by lightning all the time. Why are you suddenly like, oh, it's done, we're cooked? There's this great video. I saw it ages ago. Maybe it was on YouTube or like somewhere. And it's just like crazy ass turbulence. And turbulence, fun fact, never brought down like a commercial plane. So turbulence is fine. There's absolutely nothing to be worried about. And there's just like this picture of this dude, and the turbulence is nuts. It's like, boom, and he's just filming himself being like, hey, and people around him are like, and he's just obvious like mega frequent flyer, just being like, yeah, it is what it is. So fucking crazy. I've been on some flights with some pretty heavy turbulence, but nothing like that. It was nuts. Like, it was like... The plane began to break up before hurtling down into the rainforest from 10,000 feet, during which time Julianne lost consciousness. All 6 crew members and 85 of the 86 passengers lost their lives. But Julianne's life was far from over. I mean, she wasn't in the best of shape. When she finally awoke in the wilderness, Julianne had a broken collarbone and a ruptured knee ligament. I've had the broken collarbone. It's unpleasant. It's not going to prevent you. The ruptured knee ligament, I'll be a lot more worried about in this situation because she's got some walking ahead of her. One of her eyes had swollen shut whilst the other had narrowed to a tiny slit. It didn't help matters that the incredibly short-sighted Julianne had also lost her glasses. Damn it, she'd even lost one of her shoes. But she was alive. It's not entirely clear how on earth Julianne survived such a dramatic fall from the sky. She was still strapped into her seat on a 3-seat bench, and it's speculated that the impact of the landing may have been softened by an updraft from the thunderstorm and the cushioning of the dense foliage into which it tumbled. That is just insanity, that you survived a full-on commercial plane crash from 10,000 feet when everyone else died. That's absolute madness. But Julianne still had her work cut out for her as she limped feebly and almost blind through a humid landscape of precarious pitfalls, poisonous predators, and pestiferous plants for 9 days. She could, of course, draw upon the survival skills that she'd been learning before the authorities decided that it was more important for Julianne to learn about mathematical equations. She followed the water downstream, as she knew this was likely to flow into bigger streams and hopefully lead to civilization, and she made sure that she waded through the middle to avoid the dangerous plants on either side and the piranhas, which usually stick to shallow water. Oh my god, I'd definitely be on the sides. I'd be in the sides being like, yeah, there's sharks and shit. I know sharks are in the sea and stuff, but I'd be like, I don't want to go in the middle. That's where the dangerous stuff is. I'll be at the sides getting nibbled at by piranhas. On the 4th day, she heard the sound of a king vulture in the distance and remembered that the species only landed where there was rotting flesh on the ground. So she was like, yeah, let's go towards that. Harbouring faint hopes that her mother might still be alive among the other passengers. Julianne, oh no, oh no. How old was she? This is going to be f***ed up. She followed the sound, but only came across an upside-down flight bench to which 3 dead bodies were still strapped, the heads rammed into the earth. Julianne admits that she breathed a sigh of relief when she inspected the feet of the female body and saw that the toenails were polished. Her mother never polished her toenails. Julia, I've told this story before, but somehow I accidentally saw like videos of the bodies after a big plane crash. Like I saw these pictures on Google image search just by accident. I can't remember what I searched for, but I was like, oh my lord. And that made me a little bit more afraid of flying for some reason, because it was like they were f***ed up. Don't Google that. Don't Google anything like that. Like I definitely didn't search for like air crash dead bodies. I think I must have just been searching for an air crash picture to like use in a video or whatever. And Google Safe Search did not f***ing deliver on what I wanted it to deliver. I never want to see that. I never wanted to see that. Julianne was feeling increasingly weak, and the only food she'd eaten for the whole 9 days was a bag of sweets found near the crash site. And now she had another problem to contend with. A deep wound in her upper right arm had become infested with maggots about 1 centimetre long. Wait, the wound was 1 centimetre long, or the maggots were 1 centimetre long?
That's quite big.
She eventually stumbled across a shed in which she found a jug of gasoline. Remembering how her father had once treated their pet dog's maggot infection, she sucked the gasoline out and spat it into the wound, eventually pulling out no less than 30 stubborn maggots who really weren't so keen on being evicted. F*** me! No! This is like one of those moments. The shed itself was a promising find. After spending the night there, the Peruvian loggers who owned the shed came wandering by the next morning and discovered Julianne. She was taken to the local village for something to eat before she was airlifted to hospital and ultimately reunited with her father. After she recovered, they faced the grim task of going back to the crash site to join the search parties, and this was when she identified her mother's body. What the Why would you do that? There's professionals for that. You don't have to do that. You're a kid who was in the plane crash. Were they just like, you know what's not enough trauma, surviving a plane crash? Let's throw some more trauma in there by going out to take a look at the dead bodies of her friends and family. It's pretty f***ed up, isn't it? Julianne's mother was one of several passengers who were also believed to have survived the initial crash but died before their injuries could be rescued. It's no surprise that Julianne was fearful of flying after this incident, but she still very much continued her ecological work, taking over as director of the Panguana station in 2000. She's also had a couple of movies made about her ordeal, although the 1974 Italian version, Miracles Still Happen, depicted her as a hysterical and selfish idiot. I'd recommend going for the 1998 version, Wings of Hope, in which she's portrayed in a fair and more sympathetic light by German director Werner Herzog. Strangely enough, Werner had escaped his own brush with death on Lancer Flight 508. He had intended to take the very same flight but changed his plans at the last minute. No way! That's crazy! Particle Man. What do you think would happen if you stuck your head inside a running particle accelerator and got struck by a proton beam traveling at the speed of light? Well, I'll tell you something, it's not going to be a good time. Well, let's jolly well find out, shall we? I've sat through many a shitty corporate training video which it solemnly explained that about 97% of accidents in the workplace are the result of horseplay. I'd definitely be doing the horseplay. I'd be the dude in that place that video's made for, and then I'll finish the video and I'll be off to do some horseplay. Just like throwing some shit around, or like just, I don't know. Especially, it's like that inner child. You just like want to mess around. So stop mucking about, people. This is not a playground. It's one thing to start acting the clown in a mail sorting office or a bank, but I imagine you need to be particularly careful when you're working alongside a particle accelerator. It's probably not a good idea to go and stick your head inside of it for a laugh. To be fair to Soviet scientist Anatoly Vygotsky, he wasn't indulging in horseplay at the Institute for High Energy Physics in Vygotsky. Wait, was his name Vygotsky and he works in Vygotsky? Okay. In 1978, he was just trying to fix a faulty component in the U-70 synchrotron. Synchrotron. It sounds like a bad guy from Transformers. Still the highest energy particle accelerator in Russia today. As we all know, particle accelerators such as the Large Hadron Collider near Geneva were designed to blow up the universe, or at least they were designed to help physicists get to grips on subatomic particles by speeding them up inside an immensely powerful magnetic field and then smashing them together to monitor the results from the collisions and study the fundamental properties of dark matter. Yeah, he's either that science or to destroy the universe, Danny. Come on. Whilst proton therapy is used as radiation treatment for cancer patients in small healthy doses, 36-year-old Anatoly was hit by a blast of electron volts over 300 times the recommended maximum when he... I always wonder what proton therapy was. I drive past sometimes. There's a big building called the Proton Therapy Center. I always wonder what proton therapy is. I'm always driving, so I never look it up, and I always forget to look it up later because I'm just curious what proton therapy was. And now I know! Thanks, Danny! He was hit by a blast of electron volts over 300 times the recommended maximum when he carelessly shoved his head inside the particle accelerator. It's likely that no other human being in history has ever experienced such an intense beam of radiation. The beam went right through Anatoly's earlobe and passed through his brain before exiting through his left nostril. The scientist revealed that he saw a flash brighter than 1,000 suns but felt no pain whatsoever. He didn't even bother telling anyone about it at first. He just went home as usual that night and told his wife that he had a bit of a funny day in the office. It was only when his face began to swell up that he decided to seek medical attention, and doctors initially assumed that they were about to observe a man die of a ridiculously lethal dose of radiation poisoning. I guess he's a scientist, so he knows best, but I'll be like, wait a minute, am I going to poison other people with my radiation poisoning? And I guess not. It's just like you got super dose and you can't pass it on to other people, right? And Natalie would certainly suffer the side effects for the rest of his life. How long was the rest of this dude's life? He lost hearing in one ear and suffers from occasional epileptic seizures. The strangest outcome is that the left half of his face is completely paralyzed and has stopped aging. So whilst the right side of his face reflects Natalie's current age, 80, the left side of his face is frozen in time at the age of 36. I'm 36. How about we freeze this in time? I'll put both sides of my head in a particle accelerator.
Don't do it.
Although then you'd have no, it's paralyzed, so you'd just be like, which would kind of not be great for my job. But it's quite incredible that he lived to tell the tale at all, and this is possible because the massive blast of radiation was concentrated in a relatively small area, which somehow managed to miss all of the important bits of his brain. And Natalie continued to work as a scientist for many years and was probably a bit more careful about where exactly he stuck his head. However, it does seem rather sad that he struggles to pay for his epilepsy medication today, as his application for free medication was rejected. Are you having a laugh, Russia? Get on that! Which must seriously piss him off. Radiation accidents mixed with doses of injustice are the traditional elements found in origin stories for comic book villains. Russia should think twice about potentially unleashing the furious vengeance of Particle Man. Agreed.
If you don't pass the test, I will kill your family.
Okay.
Magic Mike. It's not often that you hear a story of surprise survival following a decapitation. Oh, I know this one. This is about a chicken. This is about a chicken who has his head cut off, and they feed him little corn through his neck tube, because the
Stop it. You're ruining it. Ruining.
my nan used to decapitate chickens when she was a kid. She told me this story. She'd be like, yeah, we'd go outside, and it's totally the past. And she'd just be like, yeah, I'd go in the garden, catch one of the chickens, bash its head open, and then they'd have it for dinner. Okay. Never done that in my life. I hope I never have to. But that's exactly what happened in 1945 to Mike from Fruita, Colorado. There's a town called Fruita. It sounds like a snack. Who managed to live for a whole 18 months with a missing head. We should probably point out that Mike was a cock, though. Cockerel, like rooster. Of course, it's not that uncommon for chickens to survive for a few minutes after their head has been chopped off, but 18 months is quite an achievement. The farmer Lloyd Olson had gone out to the yard to choose a special chicken in honor of an imminent visit from his mother-in-law. This was nothing out of the ordinary, as Lloyd and his wife Clara regularly slaughtered up to 50 chickens every day and then went to town to sell the meat. Knowing that his mother-in-law was partial to a nice bit of fried chicken neck, Lloyd was ultra careful not to damage the neck too much as he hacked off the chicken of his chosen 5-month-old victim. After the deed had been done, he left the doomed cockerel in an old apple box overnight to pick up in the morning. But it turns out that the cockerel wasn't quite as doomed as you might expect. The next morning, Lloyd awoke to find a headless chicken quite happily bobbing about in his yard as if he didn't have a care in the world. You'd be like, oh my god, it's the end of the world! That's definitely one of those horsemen, isn't it? One of the four. And it was at this point that Lloyd decided to christen him Mike and care for him as a pet, possibly inspired by the old Act of God clause in which a condemned party can't face the gallows again after the supposed divine intervention of a bungled execution. That's not true, is it? They just flip the switch again, or hang you again.
It's alive! It's alive! It's alive!
It's believed that a blood clot had quickly formed to stop Mike from bleeding out, and Lloyd's super careful trimming around the neck bone had left Mike with most of his brain stem, if not an actual head. And apparently, there's not much brain in the front of a chicken's head anyway, so Mike was still left with most of his essential functions, although Lloyd had to drop liquid food and water directly into his esophagus with an eyedropper and regularly clear his throat with a syringe to prevent the buildup of mucus. This poor chicken, Jesus. Mike may have escaped the cooking pot, but instead, he was propelled onto the celebrity circuit as Mike the Headless Wonder Chicken, and he was taken around on the US on a tour, and punters were charged a quarter to get a close-up view of the cock. There was even talk of a movie, which I'm sure would have been even better than Cocaine Bear, but then Mike suddenly went even quieter than usual. Lloyd claimed for years afterwards that he had sold Mike to another guy on the sideshow circuit, but it later transpired that he was fibbing, and poor Mike had actually died in 1947 under quite careless circumstances. Following a celebrity appearance in Phoenix, Arizona, Mike began choking back in the hotel room due to another mucus buildup, but Lloyd and Clara had forgotten to pack the crucial syringe, so they just helplessly watched Mike die from suffocation. What a tragic end for a surprisingly long decapitated chicken run. On that dark night in 1947, it's questionable who was the biggest cock in the room. And that's the end of today's video. Thank you for watching. You gotta go to the hospital ASAP, or it's gonna pop and you're gonna die.
Oh, poop.